The Balcombe Street Gang were an active service unit based out of London, and one of the Provisional IRA's most efficient units operating outside of Northern Ireland. Their 14-month campaign saw them planting upwards of 40 bombs around the London area, which killed and injured many and struck terror in the hearts of Londoners. Their reign came to an end after a 6-day siege took place between members of the gang and the London Metropolitan Police. And in this episode, we will learn about the gang itself and the siege, which was watched live on TV by millions of people around the world. This is the Troubles Podcast, a podcast about the violence and bloodshed that occurred in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain, as multiple sides and organisations waged a bloody conflict over the status of Northern Ireland. Irish Republicans staging attacks in England is not something which began during the Troubles. Go back another 100 years to 1881 with what is known as the Fenian Dynamite Campaign. This saw members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the United Irishmen of America and Clan na Gael stage attacks on government and civilian targets in Great Britain. Numerous bombs were planted, which ended up injuring over 80 people and killing one, a young child. This campaign ceased around 1885, though attacks did continue over the subsequent years. Then when it came to the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the Provisional IRA quickly realised that bombs detonated in England were much more valuable to ones detonated in Northern Ireland. It showed that the Troubles didn't just take place on Northern Irish soil, but could happen in the heart of England. The IRA campaign in England began in March 1973 and gathered steam as the year progressed. On March 8, 1973, the first attack in England took place. 4 car bombs were planted around London by a team consisting of the Price sisters, Dolores and Marion. One went off, and this day became known as the Old Bailey bombing. Many of these bombers were arrested while trying to leave England after planting the bombs, and it was quickly realised that it was a mistake planting bombs and trying to flee so quickly. It was then decided that the Provisional IRA would have sleeper cells in England that would remain there while carrying out attacks. For those unaware, a sleeper cell would be an individual who would travel over and lie low until they decided to become active. They would operate in small groups of 3 to 4, and they wouldn't flee the country after an attack, but rather hide out in safe houses. This would allow them to carry out a number of bombings over a period of a few months. Throughout 1973, there were bombings in a number of places around London, mostly train stations, including King's Cross Station, Baker Street Station and Victoria Station. In many cases, the bombs used were throw bombs, which looked like small hand grenades, with short fuses of around 2 seconds, which were thrown into a train carriage or through the window of a pub, and then the thrower would run away. They also used letter bombs, fire bombs, car bombs, and secondary bombs. Secondary bombs were second bombs hidden near the location of the first bomb. The first one would detonate, and then when security services came to the scene, the second one would detonate. In the early days, these attacks rarely killed civilians, but the attacks did force Londoners to adopt somewhat of a war mentality.
I don't have to spell out the dangers from bombs. Here's how the public can help us and themselves. If you find an unattended package or bag, whatever you do, don't touch it.
Though these sleeper cells targeted British institutions, they also wanted to strike fear in the hearts of everyday civilians. So they began targeting shops and restaurants, and would hide firebombs in the pockets of clothing, which were for sale in clothes shops on Oxford Street in London. The Provisional IRA wanted to create chaos, so that English people would put pressure on their government to put an end to the violence in Northern Ireland. They also wanted to cause as much damage as possible and to disrupt the British economy, creating a sense of instability. So who were the Balcombe Street Gang, and when did they arrive in London? The first 2 members of the gang to fly to England were Brendan Dowd and Joe O'Connell. The men flew from Shannon to London on the pretence of seeking work. They rented a flat in the city, which would act as a place to lay low, store nitroglycerin and make bombs. Dowd would eventually leave London and set up a new cell in Manchester. O'Connell had a background in electronics and was the bomb maker for the group in the early days. The first attack generally attributed to the Balcombe Street Gang occurred on October 5th, 1974, in what has become known as the Guildford pub bombing, and was covered early on in this podcast. The gang targeted 2 pubs in Guildford, which is an area southwest of London. These pubs, the Horse and Groom and the Seven Stars, were frequented by off-duty military personnel. 5 people were killed in this attack. We'll return back to the Guildford pub bombing soon. They carried out 3 more attacks in October, using throw bombs and timed bombs to target clubs and military institutions. Some were injured in these attacks, but there were no fatalities. It was the fallout from the attacks in London and the Birmingham pub bombing which helped speed up the passing of the Prevention of Terrorism Act through the British Parliament in late 1974. Some described it as draconian because of the powers it offered, but it was argued that with the threat of the IRA, Britain was facing its greatest threat on its land since World War II. The Act gave sweeping authority to British authorities to proscribe organisations, and it also gave more power to interrogate those entering the UK via airports and ports. They could also detain suspected paramilitaries for extended periods without charging them of anything. Okay, back to the gang. By November 1974, Hugh Doherty and Eddie Butler had flown over and joined Dowd and O'Connell, and the gang's activity was ramping up at a dramatic pace. There were bomb attacks, and on November 11th, Alan Quatermain, a London insurance broker, was shot as he was being chauffeur-driven through the city. He died a week later. It's unclear why he was killed and who exactly carried it out. By now the attacks were in full swing, and I saw one source saying that there was, on average, 1 attack in England every 3 days. Then, on December 19th, the largest bomb that had been seen in London since 1944 was detonated. A stolen Ford Cortina, loaded with £100 of explosives, was parked outside Selfridge's department store on Oxford Street. 3 warning calls were then placed and the area was evacuated. The bomb detonated, causing around £1.5 million worth of damage.
Oxford Street is now closed. Keep moving and keep the footways and the roadways clear.
Well, it blew the whole of this lot, all the glass, all the windows, all went out. And the blast went straight through open the doors in the restaurant, and went straight across the room to us. This was just massive glass everywhere.
The manager of Harrods, which was another department store, had boasted publicly that his store was bomb-proof. And to be honest, taunting this gang was quite unwise. And just a couple of days after the bomb at Selfridge's, there was another bombing in the furniture section of Harrods department store. The bomb parts were smuggled inside piece by piece, with the grenade then being assembled in the store. There were 10,000 people inside the building that day, but luckily no one was killed in the bombing. A warning call had been placed and the evacuation had been carried out successfully. On December 22nd, 1974, they then targeted the home of former Prime Minister Edward Heath. Heath was the man behind internment without trial, and he was the one who imposed direct rule. So because of this, he was a symbolic figure for provisionals to target. He was not home at the time and no one was injured. In the wake of the bombing, the men fleeing the scene were driving erratically and caught the attention of a passing police car, who pursued them but were then forced off their tail to attend the scene of a bombing. An IRA ceasefire began just 2 hours after this attack and lasted until January 2nd, 1975. 1975 saw a new member join the gang, Liam Quinn. He was an American, born in San Francisco, who joined the Provisional IRA. He was given the nickname Yankee Joe. The gang then resumed their attacks on January 19th, staging 2 gun attacks on 2 hotels in London. Then a few days later, they exploded a bomb at a waterworks pumping station. On January 27th, they showed just how much chaos they could cause, planting 7 time bombs all over the city. 2 of the bombs were found by bomb doctors who defused them. 5 of them exploded, injuring 6 people. This was the last attack carried out by them before another Provisional IRA truce began. This one was longer lasting than the Christmas truce, which lasted until August of that year. But it was on February 26th that the gang was to experience their first setback. A police officer was responding to a burglary when he passed by an IRA safe house on Fairholme Road. He had no idea that it was a safe house, but there was one individual walking by who caught his attention, IRA member Liam Quinn. Suspecting he was a burglar, the officer approached him, grabbed him, and asked him what was in his pockets. Quinn broke free and ran off, but what appeared to be a good Samaritan on a motorbike got off his bike and spread out his arms to block the running Quinn's path. Quinn produced a gun and shot the motorcyclist at point-blank range twice in the chest.
Last thing that entered my head was this guy would have a gun in his pocket. He was rolling around, obviously in some pain. I looked down at him and he looked up at me and said, "God help me, I'm a police officer." And then his eyes rolled back and he fell into unconsciousness. I didn't know Stephen Tibble as he turned out to be. The only time I knew he was a police officer was when he told me with what turned out to be his dying words.
Quinn managed to flee the scene and escaped back to Ireland and eventually to the USA, but his past would catch up with him eventually. The investigation which occurred after the shooting would lead police to the IRA safe house in the area, which turned out to be where the members were assembling bombs. The remaining members had fled, but had left behind a trove of bomb-making tools and evidence. It was there they found 18 sets of fingerprints, 14 of which were identified, but 4 were not. On August 27th, the Balcombe Gang ended its ceasefire and entered into its second phase of attacks, which proved to be significantly more deadly than their first phase. They planted a bomb under a table in a pub in Surrey, around 1.5 hours from London. The pub, the Caterham Arms, was frequented by members of the Welsh Guard, and this bombing had all the same trappings as the Guildford pub bomb. Here's a pub regular talking about it.
The attitude of the people outside towards the Irish was frightening. Oh, effing this and effing that, really anti-Irish. And I thought, fine, all right, the IRA, the people that do it, there's an awful lot of Irish people that are perfectly lovely and don't even agree with this. And it was horrible because I thought, God, if anybody opens their mouth that's Irish, that's nice, they'll probably get beaten up or something. It was terrible. I think the worst thing that night was the thought that you're out for a good time and someone had got the bare face to come in, sit down, plant a bomb, and then go and know that there's so many people there. But how can they just do that, walk in and see everybody and know that they're going to kill and devastate people's... Oh, I just couldn't get to grips with that.
Fortunately, no one was killed, but 23 civilians and 10 off-duty soldiers were injured, some very seriously. 3 people lost limbs, and 1 soldier lost both his legs and an arm. This caused some confusion, as this bombing was exactly the same style as the Guildford pub bombing, but the perpetrators of the Guildford pub bombing had already been convicted and given life sentences. Back when that bombing happened, there was a frenzy to see arrests made. And though there was little to no evidence, 4 people ended up being arrested for this crime: Jerry Conlon, Paul Hill, Paddy Armstrong and Carol Richardson. But this case was a gross miscarriage of justice. None of them had anything to do with the bombs. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were eventually released after having served 15 to 16 years for a crime that none of them had committed. One day after the Caterham pub bombings, August 28th, the gang planted a booby-trapped time bomb on Oxford Street. There was virtually no way to defuse this bomb without it prematurely exploding, and they were hoping to kill a bomb disposal expert. On this day, the bomb went off before anyone discovered it, but the following day another booby-trapped bomb was planted. This time, bomb doctor Roger Goad attended the scene and was killed instantly when he attempted to defuse the bomb. Throughout August, September and November, the bombings continued, with the gang using a combination of time bombs and throw bombs to target a number of hotels, restaurants and specific individuals. In particular, they targeted London's West End, which was the trendy shopping and dining district of the city. To combat this, restaurants and hotels were sandbagging or taping up their windows to prevent damage from glass shattering. On September 5th, a time bomb exploded at the Hilton Hotel in London, killing 2 people. There were 2 more bombs then on the 22nd and 25th. Then, on October 9th, Eddie Butler was assembling a bomb in the toilet of a hotel when a member of staff knocked on the door. Eddie fled the hotel and threw a time bomb into Green Street Station, killing 1 person. On October 23rd, Conservative MP Hugh Fraser was targeted after he suggested reintroducing the death penalty for IRA members. A bomb was planted under his car, which was spotted by a man walking his dogs, cancer researcher Dr. Gordon Hamilton Fairley. It's believed that Fairley leaned on the car to see what the device was and it detonated, killing him instantly. This one caused significant outrage, as Dr. Hamilton was one of the foremost cancer specialists in the country.
They didn't intend to kill him, but the bomb is the most indiscriminate of weapons. You may select a target, but if you put a bomb down to take it out, collateral damage, both human and premises-wise, is huge. It doesn't care, and they didn't care, who was involved in their bombs. It is indiscriminate.
On November 12th, a throw bomb was tossed into Scott's Oyster Bar, which killed 1 civilian. Then on the 18th, another one was thrown into Walter's restaurant, killing 2. Ross McWhirter was the man credited with founding the Guinness Book of World Records, with his twin brother Norris. He was a children's TV personality and also Conservative Party activist, and was extremely critical of the Provisional IRA, especially in the wake of the killing of Dr. Hamilton. He called for a reintroduction of capital punishment and was suspicious of the Irish community in Great Britain and advocated for a number of restrictions on them. He also offered a bounty of £50,000 for any information which would lead to the conviction of the Balcombe Street Gang. Here he is talking on November 4th, 1975.
I think that history shows that when somebody has a price on their head, that they're more likely to be turned into the authorities. It's not a particularly pleasant thought, but that is a lesson of history.
This appearance piqued the attention of the gang, and on November 27th, McWhirter was assassinated outside his home. Here's his wife, Rosemary, talking about the night in question.
Been to the dentist and come back, and we were going to the theatre that evening with some friends, and I'd been to put petrol in the car and came back, and it was darkish. As I got out of the car, somebody came from the other side of the car, and the other one said to me, "Hand over the keys." And I sort of thought, strange thing, you know, I nearly chucked them in the garden. And then as he was pointing a gun at me, I thought, well, perhaps I better hand the keys to him. And that left me without keys to get into the house. So I rang the front doorbell and thinking, oh, Ross must come and deal with these people. Not thinking who they were, he came to the door and I sort of said, oh, do something about this. And I sort of rushed past him, and at that moment they shot him. The first shot actually went into his side, I think, and I had been told that if it had only been that one, it would have been, you know, it wouldn't have killed him, but they then shot him in the head as well. And I came and saw him sort of slumped inside the front door, and I rushed out of the front door down the path and to neighbours to try and get help.
He was shot at close range in the head and chest by Harry Duggan and Hugh Doherty. This is the last killing generally attributed to the gang before their operation was interrupted. Throughout 1974 and 1975, dozens of bombs had exploded in London, and in total 19 people had been killed. The police were having trouble capturing the cell, but they certainly weren't sitting idle. In late 1975, they devised Operation Combo, which was an attempt to catch the cell. They began by making a profile of what they knew so far. They established a few things. For one, the attacks did have a sort of pattern. The cell generally avoided carrying out attacks on rainy days or weekends. They also would revisit places they previously attacked and attack them again, with their attacks usually taking place between 6:30 and 10:30 in the evening. During these time periods, 1,000 plainclothes police officers flooded parts of London, which were considered high risk of being bombed. The operation ran for 8 days and was costing an absolute fortune to continue running. They believed that Scott's Oyster Bar might get targeted again, as the cell was definitely watching the news on television, and there had been a recent report showing people defiantly returning to eat there just one day after it was bombed.
The reason we came here today was simply because this place had been blown up last night, and I thought the boys would enjoy being in a place which had been blown up, and they'd find it an adventure.
This sort of taunting seemed to attract members of the cell into attacking again. And it worked. At around 8:30 p.m, 4 members of the gang, Joe O'Connell, Edward Butler, Harry Duggan and Hugh Doherty, got into a stolen Ford Cortina and drove into London's West End. The men were armed with 2 machine guns and 5 pistols. Their target for the night was Scott's restaurant. The car approached the restaurant, and as they drove by, they raked the restaurant with gunfire from the machine guns. Members of Operation Combo witnessed this attack, and word got out about the stolen vehicle and the license plate details. 2 plainclothes officers commandeered a taxi and gave chase following the Cortina. After driving for several miles, the men abandoned their car and broke into a run, turning and firing shots at pursuing officers. A chase ensued, and more police arrived in the area, and the net was closing in on the men. They ended up running into a block of council flats on Balcombe Street, and it was here that the siege began. While this chaos was going on outside, John and Sheila Matthews were sitting in their apartment 22B, when somebody rang their buzzer. The door opened and 4 armed men burst into their apartment, and over the next few days the eyes of the world would be on this small apartment. Patricia Atkins, Sheila's sister, was watching the news when they saw that there was a disturbance on the street where Sheila and John lived. After calling the apartment twice, she soon realised that the IRA men were in her sister's apartment, so she placed a phone call to the police, alerting them. When police called to the apartment, the men said that they were with the Provisional IRA and they demanded a plane to Ireland. On the outside, Detective Superintendent Peter Imbert led the operation. It was decided the police would adopt a softly approach with the hostage takers. Outside, snipers had set up posts and the men were completely surrounded. The phone lines were cut to prevent them from calling outside the apartment, and a direct phone line was set up between the police and the hostage takers. The men talked with police, telling them that their names were Tom, Dick and Paddy. Tom then talked with Detective Peter Imbert on the outside. The detective asked to speak with Sheila to make sure that she was okay. Tom then mentioned that she's fine, but she could use a glass of water. This was a slip-up from the cell, as it revealed to the police that they didn't have access to the kitchen. They were confined to the living room with no access to food or water. This forced their hand, and they would have to rely on the police for food and water. The police opted to starve them and try to encourage them to give up. Officers did end up lowering drinking water down from an apartment above to the balcony below. As the hostage takers continued to put pressure on the police on the phone line, Peter continued to defer and delay, saying he was working on it. But they had absolutely no intention of providing a plane. The whole thing was quite sensational, and there were many journalists on the scene. Everyone in the flat would sit and listen to the news on the radio every day, so negotiators believed that they could psychologically affect the men by asking reporters to broadcast just how well armed the police on the outside were. After 4 days, conditions in the flat deteriorated. The men were starving and began negotiating with police to get some food in the flat. Soup and sandwiches were lowered into the apartment from the room above. On day 5, the men prepared to make a run for it. The plan was to escape out of the apartment with their hostages into a car below. But then they heard a news report saying that the SAS had arrived on the scene and were planning to storm the apartment. This intimidated the men, and they began speaking with the police about surrendering.
One of the hostages
No, let's get it straight then, so there's no mistake. You'll let Mrs. Matthews go? Yes. There's not much of a walk. She knows the way. If she turns left and walks along the balcony, there'll be somebody there to meet her.
Somebody will have to go with her. If one of our men walks her by the window and comes back again, can you give them safe passage?
Yes.
It was decided that Hugh would step out to the balcony, which connected the two apartments, with Sheila Matthews, and release her to the waiting police. Hugh would then return to the inside of the flat. In exchange for the release of Sheila, hot sausages, Brussels sprouts and potatoes, and peaches and cream were then lowered into the flat. This was the last meal they ate as free men. The men then agreed on a total surrender, where they would leave the apartment via the balcony one by one, with their hands in the air. Dramatic footage was then broadcast, with the men walking out one by one to a police officer armed with a handgun pointed at them. The last hostage, John Matthews, came out third, with his hands on his head. Then there were just two, Harry and Joe, who left the apartment one by one, leaving their guns inside. So after 6 days, the siege had come to an end, without a single shot being fired. The trial for the men took place in 1977, which saw Joe O'Connell, Edward Butler, Harry Duggan and Hugh Doherty appear in a court at the Old Bailey in London. The men were faced with a litany of charges and were eventually found guilty of 7 murders, conspiring to cause explosives, and falsely imprisoning John and Sheila Matthews during the siege. O'Connell, Butler and Duggan received 12 life sentences, with Doherty receiving 11. The men were given what's known as a whole life tariff, meaning that they were to spend their entire lives in prison. They were the only members of the Provisional IRA to receive this tariff. It was during this trial that the men instructed their lawyers to tell the courts that it was they who carried out the bombing in Guildford, and that the wrong people had been imprisoned for it. They wanted to, quote, attention to the fact that 4 totally innocent people were serving massive sentences. Despite this admission, the Guildford 4 and McWhirter 7 remained behind bars, some for 15 more years, before their convictions were completely quashed. William Quinn, who shot and killed police officer Stephen Tibble, was eventually arrested in San Francisco in 1981. He was extradited back to the UK in 1986 and was given a life sentence for the killing. So in total, 19 people died as a result of this campaign. 16 were killed from bombings and 3 from gunfire. Of the 19 killed, 6 were British military, 1 was a police officer, 1 was a member of the bomb squad, and 11 were civilians. So what became of the men in prison? The original 4 served 23 years behind bars before being transferred to Portlaoise Prison in Ireland in 1998, in anticipation of their release as a result of the Good Friday Agreement. One of the terms of the Good Friday Agreement meant that any paramilitary on either side who was in prison as a result of political violence would be given a licence of release. On Sunday, May the 10th, 1998, the men were given temporary release to appear together in Dublin at a Sinn Féin Ard Feis, which is their annual party conference. The men stood up on a podium and were met with a 10-minute ovation of clapping and cheering from the crowd. They were greeted by Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. To many, these men were ruthless killers, but to this crowd they were heroes who sacrificed their freedom for Ireland. Adams even went so far as to refer to them as our Nelson Mandelas. The appearance was important to Adams. He needed Sinn Féin to vote yes on the Good Friday Agreement. To vote no would put these 4 men back in prison. There was a clause in the agreement stating that political prisoners would be released, but only if the deal was endorsed. There was no concern of that, and 94.6% of the party voted yes to endorse the deal. The men were eventually released in 1999 alongside Brendan Dowd and Liam Quinn. Since being released, some of the men have remained active politically with Sinn Féin or attended Republican commemorations, but all have more or less continued to live a quiet, unassuming life. Hugh Doherty became established as an artist based in Donegal. Edward Butler died in 2024. This brings us to the end of the story of the Balcombe Street Gang. Dubbed by the media as the most violent, ruthless and highly trained unit ever sent to Britain by the Provisional IRA, the group left a profound mark on London during their 14-month campaign of bombings and shootings. Their trial and subsequent convictions closed one of the most intense chapters of the IRA's campaign in England. Yet the violence didn't end with their imprisonment. Other IRA cells continued to operate in England throughout the late 70s and 80s. But few matched the ferocity and frequency of the Balcombe Street Gang during that time. That's it from me. Thanks, and see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Troubles podcast. If you enjoyed it and would like to support me making more episodes like this, you can do so over at patreon.com/the Troubles podcast. For the price of a coffee and a pint, you can get access to early ad-free episodes, companion videos after every episode, and hours of additional content, as well as a couple of Patreon exclusive episodes. And it's the support from the Patreons that helps this podcast continue to grow. And if you're not in a position to support financially, the best thing you can do is just tell your friends. Every bit helps. So thanks for sticking around, and see you next time.